all over a project that never moved forward. The Mueller probe narrows as the president prepares for high-stakes diplomacy. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Tonight, fresh off a trip to Mexico, Senator Mike Lee gives us the inside scoop on the caravan, and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke responds to the climate change report and his many critics. But first, we're following two major breaking stories tonight. Michael Cohen, once a fierce ally of the president, cutting a plea deal with the special counsel. And as Russia doubles down on Ukraine, President Trump cancels his Saturday meeting with Vladimir Putin. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live in Argentina tonight. Good evening, John.
Shannon, good evening to you. And the president left the White House earlier today in the morning, heading for the helicopter and then Air Force One. He seemed to think that the meeting here at the G20 with Vladimir Putin that was scheduled for Saturday was a go, with the caveat that he was going to get a briefing when he got aboard Air Force One on what was going on with Russia and the aggression against Ukraine. Shortly after the president boarded Air Force One, he was given a briefing by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, along with the National Security Advisor John Bolton and the Chief of Staff John Kelly. Then the president decided that he was not going to have that bilateral meeting with Putin. He tweeted about that. Sarah Sanders says the reason was that Russia was refusing to return Ukrainian sailors that it detained after that confrontation earlier in the week. The president is under a lot of political pressure to not have a bilateral meeting with Putin, that even just sitting down with him could be seen as rewarding him for that aggression against the Ukraine, or at the very least turning a blind eye to it. The timing with the Cohen story as well didn't land for very good optics, so the president has decided that all of that taken together, he's going to cancel the meeting with Putin. He's going to have it at a later date, but likely that it wouldn't happen until sometime in the new year, and likely not early in the new year either, Shannon. So it could be a while before these two leaders sit down together, and it is important that they continue the dialogue. There's no question about that.
Yeah, they've got plenty to talk about. Obviously, the other big story, Cohen's second guilty plea today. Are there any coattails for the president from this?
According to Rudy Giuliani, they are not, because it was information that was handed over by the Trump organization, documents, emails, and the like, that helped to nail Cohen, catch him in a lie. In a statement, Rudy Giuliani saying, quote, documents the special counsel's office is using to show that Cohen lied to Congress were voluntarily disclosed by the Trump organization. Giuliani also going off on the timing of this guilty plea, saying, quote, it is hardly coincidental that the special counsel once again files a charge just as the president is leaving for a meeting with world leaders. The president learned about the guilty plea last night. The Department of Justice informed a member of his outside counsel team, Jane Raskin. She then phoned the president to let him know what was going on. Rudy Giuliani also learned about it. He spoke to the president last night and again this morning. The president, as he was leaving the White House this morning, unloaded on Cohen with both barrels. Listen here.
I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it. If I did do it, there would have been nothing wrong. That was my business. So he's lying very simply to get a reduced sentence, okay?
We also found out today that the president did answer a question from Robert Mueller, the special counsel, about the Trump Tower Moscow meetings, who the president talked to about it, what they talked about. The one thing we also learned about that was that in the answer that the president gave to Robert Mueller, he didn't talk about when the discussions regarding Trump Tower ended, for the simple reason, Shannon, that the president was not asked by Robert Mueller when those discussions ended. All
right, that's why the back and forth on those questions obviously is so important. Okay, also a BuzzFeed story today, John, about plans for Putin to allegedly get a posh pad at that Trump Tower in Moscow if it had moved forward.
Yeah, this story really came out of the blue. It cited one of the originators of this idea, and the originator of the idea was a real estate guy named Felix Sater. We tried to get in touch with him today. We could not, but apparently the plan was, according to BuzzFeed, for the Trump Tower project to give Vladimir Putin the penthouse, which was worth some $50 million, in order to try to attract Russian oligarchs to the project to say, hey, come live where Vladimir Putin lives. I talked to a source that was close to the president who talked to him about this. The president said that the story is, quote, nuts, that it's a stupid idea to think about giving a $50 million penthouse to the president of Russia, and that the president certainly didn't hear anything about this. But we'll keep on chasing it down, because certainly if that were the case, it would add an entirely new dimension to this story, Shannon.
It sure would. All right, John Roberts traveling live with the president at the G20. Thank you very much. Well, a timeline in 2016 is at the center of tonight's controversy involving Michael Cohen and whether the president's answers regarding those key months line up with his former attorney. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with that part of the story. Good evening, Catherine.
Shannon, the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, confirmed to Fox Tonight the special counsel asked about the Moscow real estate proposal, and there is, quote, no contradiction between the president's written answers for Mueller and Cohen, whose congressional testimony paved the way for today's plea. When the president's former personal attorney testified behind closed doors to the Senate Intelligence Committee last year, he also provided a two-page written summary about a Moscow real estate project. According to a draft obtained by Fox, Cohen told congressional investigators the proposal was under consideration at the Trump Organization from September 2015 until the end of January 2016. But Cohen told a New York court the discussions lasted another 5 months. Cohen continued, I never considered asking Mr. Trump to travel to Russia in connection with this proposal. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Trump was never in contact with anyone about this proposal other than me on 2 occasions. But the plea says Cohen agreed to travel and contemplated his boss might also make the trip. On Capitol Hill, the Senate Intelligence Committee leadership reacted.
There seems to be a trend here amongst so many of the president's closest allies that they don't tell the truth.
I haven't seen the specific indictment or the plea, but this is a reason people shouldn't lie when they're in front of a congressional investigation.
Felix Sater, a Russian-born business developer, told the Senate panel that he was the go-between on the Moscow project. In this November 2015 email, Sater boasts to Cohen about his ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Quote, buddy, our boy can become president of the USA, and we can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this. I will manage this process. There's no one on this planet that wants Donald elected more than I do. The Moscow real estate deal was never sealed.
We were thinking about building a building. I guess we had in a form. It was an option. I don't know what you'd call it. I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it.
Based on the new Cohen timeline, the negotiations with Moscow continued well into the presidential campaign and during the same month of the controversial June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. Legal experts say Cohen may be problematic for the special counsel in the future.
At some point, someday, Bob Mueller might call Michael Cohen as a witness. This is a guy who you have indicted for making false statements to Congress, and at the same time, you're now holding him up as a model of probity or as someone whose word can be taken at face value.
In the plea, Cohen said he briefed Trump family members, but none of the president's children are identified. In his Senate testimony, Donald Trump Jr. said he was, quote, peripherally aware of the deal, Shannon.
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Former Chief Counsel for Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee, Julian Epstein. Fox News contributor, former Chief Assisting U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy. And Chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp. Gentlemen, there is a buffet of stuff for us to discuss. But Julian, let me start there with Tom Dupree's last soundbite. That was part of Catherine's report where he said, listen, you're going to use this guy hopefully to go after other people. But what you've done is make a deal with him admitting that he's a liar. And that's what the president called him today.
Well, no prosecutor would take a witness that was flipped, their testimony at face value. You corroborate that with lots of email and other information, which is what they did in this case. And, you know, let me say, there's nothing in the Cohen plea today that suggests that the president did anything illegal. I think the question that people are raising is why at a time when the Russians were engaged in illegal efforts to interfere with the election by hacking computers, making illegal campaign ads on Facebook and elsewhere, spending millions doing it, Why were there so many channels of communication between Trump and the Russians and Russian lieutenants, and why were there so many lies about it? It's not that the president lied in his answers to Mueller, it's that the president consistently during the 2016 campaign denied any business interests with the Russians whatsoever and continued to deny it, as did everyone on the team, until they were caught. In the same way that they lied about the purpose of the Trump Tower meeting, where emails revealed that the purpose of that meeting, according to Don Jr.'s emails, was to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, even though they had a different cover story.
Yeah, let me bring...
It's the dishonesty that are raising a lot of flags here.
Okay, let me bring Andy on that point, because you wrote a piece today and you talk about the fact that that Trump Tower meeting in back in 2016, you think that that is going to be a big focus, and it is a big focus for Mueller. Andy?
Yeah, I do, Shannon, because at this point I think that the original collusion allegation, and one that would be of great interest to prosecutors, would be hacking, because hacking is an actual crime. Collusion is just concerted activity. What prosecutors care about is conspiracy. For conspiracy, you have to have an agreement to commit a crime. It is a crime to agree to hack, but it doesn't look like they have any evidence of that. So I think what they've done is they've moved on to show other forms of collusion that sound, icky and nefarious. And look, I'm not here to endorse having relations with the Russians. I'm like old school. They're a geopolitical foe, which, I'm glad to see the Democrats now are on the same page that I've been on for a very long time on that. But I think what Mueller is doing here is focusing on the place where there is undoubtedly collusive activity between the Trump campaign and the Russians, but it's
alleged.
Not a crime.
Right,
I don't
alleged.
disagree with
and it
that.
may be something that
Well, let me play something that esteemed law professor and attorney Alan Dershowitz had to say about what the special counsel is looking at and what would or wouldn't be a crime. Here's what he says.
Let's assume for hypothetical purposes that it's true that President Trump was trying to build a tower in Moscow in the early stages of the campaign. That would not be a crime. What is Mueller doing investigating that? He doesn't have a roving commission to identify sin. This is not Salem. He has to look for federal crimes.
But, Matt, how much of this is going to be about optics anyway, whether that is a specific, whether there are specific issues, because we've talked about this being a counterintelligence investigation versus a criminal investigation. But at the same time, every little bit of this that comes out is bad optically for the president, if not legally.
I don't agree.
Well, and, he doesn't either. But I'm saying if you're looking at 2020 and running again, if they have chipped away at him so much with his dribble of people close to him getting in trouble, even if he's never touched, how do you talk to the voters about that?
Because it looks, Shannon, inherently political. It looks like what Mueller has is Russian-type stuff. A meeting with Russians, a potential business deal in Russia. That has nothing to do. I agree with Andy, collusion isn't really a legal term, but there's no question what the charge was, because we heard the charge. We heard the charge at the end of the campaign. We heard the charge right after the campaign that Donald Trump's team worked with Vladimir Putin's team to somehow rig the election to tip it towards Trump, that they were working behind the scenes in a covert fashion to make this happen. And Mueller has none of that. What Mueller has is his team's interpretation that he believes people were disingenuous or lying with some of their answers. And what he mostly has is people associated with Donald Trump who did illegal things before they were associated with the campaign. And I actually think the American people should hold this standard very clear. If Donald Trump's team actually did something to pollute our elections, then I think it's a serious charge. The rest of this is making everybody impatient. They're rolling their eyes over the fact that, Mr. Mueller, if you have the goods, spill it. Let us see it. How many more tens of millions of dollars and how many more years will it take for you to make this ridiculous charge be
We all
still.
know that we all know that special counsel investigations take a really long time sometimes, and they go in a lot of different directions. But I want to ask you all very quickly to respond to this tonight. The news that the former FBI director James Comey has gone to court to try to quash a House subpoena. They've asked him to come testify on the Hill next week. He says he doesn't want to do it behind closed doors. He worries it will be manipulated. Quickly from each of you on this, Julian, we'll start with you.
I was a former chief counsel of that committee on the Democratic side. I think Comey will be successful only because it's very difficult to enforce congressional subpoenas, and I think they generally are resolved through cooperation and through dialogue. So I think Comey probably has the upper hand, particularly as the House Judiciary Committee right now under this Congress doesn't have much time on its clock. I agree with what Andrew said before that in terms of the collusion question and conspiracy, and I don't think there's evidence that Trump or his team necessarily that they conspired to violate the computer laws or the election funding laws, the campaign finance laws. The point to that, though, that I think that everyone's missing is that when you have all of these channels of contact during the campaign and all of these campaign officials and all of these folks on the team lying about those contacts, that tends to indicate that there's some smoke
and that's a different crime. I mean, that's a process crime. But very quickly, I just need a yes or no from you, Andy and Matt. Do you think that Comey or Loretta Lynch will show up next week? Andy?
I think he should honor the subpoena, but I must say I agree with him that I'd like to see a transparent public process.
Matt?
No, I don't think he'll show up. And by the way, I don't think he's credible anymore as a witness anyway.
All right, we'll leave it there. Matt, Andy, and Julian, thank you all very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Presidents Trump and Putin will both be at the G20 summit, but tonight President Trump says they're not going to be sitting down to talk about nuclear arms control at a planned meeting or anything else. He says it's off. Well, correspondent Kristen Fisher has more details. Hello, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, nuclear arms control, it was really shaping up to be one of the most divisive issues at this Trump-Putin meeting at the G20 summit, and now that's been canceled. But Senate Republicans are still pressing President Trump to keep the heat on Russia in regards to two nuclear arms treaties, especially after Russia's most recent aggressions against Ukraine.
4 days after Russian forces shot at and seized 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels, 25 Senate Republicans sent President Trump a letter urging him to reconsider the Obama-era New START nuclear treaty, which Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to extend when the treaty expires in 2021. They say, quote, the value of the treaty depends on a sustained and vigorous U.S. nuclear weapons modernization program, strict compliance by Russia with its arms control obligations, and a true balance of nuclear capabilities between the parties to the treaty, none of which is happening, according to the Republican senators who signed on to the letter.
The Russians, with this enormous advantage in tactical nuclear weapons, have actually changed their doctrine of war to potentially use those weapons, to use nuclear weapons in a military conflict with the United States or our NATO allies.
But President Trump may not need much convincing. Just last month, he threatened to pull out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty after charging that Russia violated the agreement.
We're not going to let them violate a nuclear agreement and go out and do weapons, and we're not allowed to. We're the ones that have stayed in the agreement, and we've honored the agreement, but Russia has not, unfortunately, honored the agreement. So we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out.
Now, that threat to pull out was almost certainly going to come up at this now canceled meeting with Putin. In fact, today a Russian diplomatic source said that these two world leaders need to meet to discuss this treaty. It's important, but as of now, Shannon, that is not going to happen. At least not right now in Argentina.
Yeah,
maybe later. Maybe
they're signaling they're trying to get it together. But a lot of people praising the president for making this decision after all of the criticism that he was way too cozy with Putin in Helsinki.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Kristen, thank you.
You bet.
All right, the migrant caravan. Some members now openly admitting they will pay cartels to get them over the border illegally if the president won't let them in. And the Trump administration sends reinforcement to the border as criticism continues.
To all those up here who want to criticize how they behave on the border, go down there and walk in their shoes for a minute. And you'll figure out how difficult it is to control chaos.
Senator Mike Lee just visited Mexico and Central America. He is headed back in a matter of days. I'm going to ask him about his efforts to try to find a solution, what he saw in Mexico. Next. third of the thousands of migrants from Central America are now suffering from major health issues as they remain in Mexico, just across our southern border. Tonight, health concerns continue to grow, and Trace Gallagher is on the case. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. Considering the state of Central America
to immigrating illegally, then they're going to do it. And that's one of the reasons why I applaud the Trump administration's dedication to this issue. The fact that they're going down there trying to shore up the border, trying to ensure border security. That is a very good idea for all sorts of reasons, including the health risks that you mentioned and including the fact that we don't react well to mob rule in this country. And it's not just about the immigrants themselves. It's also and especially about the people who live right along the border. Having lived in border communities for 2 years of my life, I can tell you no one worries more about the security of their families, the security of their jobs and their neighborhoods, more than recent immigrants who live along border towns.
So why isn't Congress getting something done? I mean, we've had a situation where Democrats controlled White House, House, and Senate. We've had Republicans controlling those same three very important players, but yet nothing has been resolved.
Well, I think the biggest problem in this area relative to Congress is that Congress has been taking the approach that it has to be all or nothing. Remember 5 years ago when we had the big effort, the Gang of Eight bill that moved forward. The problem with that is they amalgamated 100 different ideas, lumped them all together, and then said, here you go. You have to take all of this package or you get none of it. Every reform that we, the Gang of Eight, have proposed, or nothing gets passed at all. I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think if we took it one bite at a time, we'd get more finished.
Will Democrats do that with you?
I hope so. I've been trying for 8 years to get them to do that. In some instances, I've found Democrats willing to cooperate on narrow immigration fixes. I hope that can gradually build momentum.
All right, we will see. It's going to be a different game in January when the new Congress is sworn in. It will include you. Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, he's got a lot on his mind, from climate change to forest fires and new outrage over a comment he made last night at the National Tree Lighting Ceremony.
The man who brought Christmas back to America.
Yeah, not everybody liked that. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is here with me live after the break. Well, states like California say they're planning to use the latest federal national climate assessment released over Thanksgiving weekend as legal ammunition against the Trump administration.
It's not just evidence, it's evidence from the experts within the federal government. So I absolutely will use every single piece of that report where we can to continue to do the work for the federal government that it's unwilling to do.
Well, the White House expressing skepticism about the new climate change report despite being released by its own administration. And Al Gore says the world is getting sick of the White House's take on climate change.
Donald J. Trump is now the face of climate denial. And there are those who are still giving him their loyalty and trust, and I get that, believe me, but the vast majority of Americans, not to mention all around the world, are really they've had it.
Well, let's see if Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke's had it. He joins us now to discuss the new report. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Great to have you back. Okay, so you know that there are those. Well, let me just tell you what the top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, had to say about this report. Here's what he says. It concludes.
This is conclusive evidence by the president's own administration of how bad climate change will be for incomes, for families, for workers, for farmers, for cities. Can't run away from it anymore. It's about time they faced the reality and worked with us to do something before it's too late.
Your response?
He should actually read it.
1,700 pages.
1,700 pages. So I sat down with our top scientists today, and this is what it says. 1,700 pages. It gives models. So if you take the extreme case, you're right, it's dire. If you take the best case, it's not much. So it's different models, but if you take the worst case each time, then it paints a pretty bad picture.
So you're saying the people who are reporting on it as a negative went strictly by the worst case scenario and didn't consider the rest of it?
It's a spread of possibility. It's like, from a military perspective, peacetime and nuclear war. If you look at nuclear war, today we're going to go home to a bunker and wear a hazardous suit. That's not the case. What we're seeing is a full spread of models. There's 200 models, 1,000 variables. So if you look at what the evidence says, we're a lot closer to the low end. The worst case is a lot towards the higher end, catastrophe. What the U.S. has done is we've reduced our carbon footprint. Since 2004, reduction in CO2, 6%, reduction in methane, 10%. The U.S. is actually reducing our carbon footprint while China, India, Russia, Europe are increasing. So we're doing the right thing, but again, it's modeling. If you look at observed data, we're a lot closer to the bottom end.
Projections. Okay. So you know that there are a lot of folks out there who say this adds, I don't want to say fuel to the fire because we're talking about the California fires, which has been absolutely devastating, but they say this kind of proves their point that that fueled a lot of that. And they say that, I know you visited there, but they say, listen, the feds manage a lot of this land, and if there are problems out there, that it's something that you all need to handle better. It's
well,
not just
they have
the
a
states.
point. There's no doubt the temperatures have risen, the fire season's longer. So that's a backdrop. But it doesn't relieve you the responsibility for managing our forests. And in Paradise, you look at what happened. We had devastation of lives, of property, thousands of acres.
And you saw it firsthand.
Yeah, and it's terrible. And this is unacceptable for it to repeat. So what do? Regardless of whether you're a believer or not a believer in climate change, there are things we should be doing to manage our forests so that it doesn't happen every year. Prescribe burns late in the season rather than mid-season. Remove the dead and dying trees. Make sure there's access to the forest so if you get a spot fire, the fire department can get there sooner. Make sure that you prioritize around buildings, evacuation routes. Remove the fuel. We're not talking about clear cutting. We're talking about forest management, and that's what the experts say, using best science, best practices, greatest good, longer term.
All right, I want to ask you about Western priorities. This group is not a fan of yours. I hear from them a lot. I get a lot of emails from them. They say Zinke's investigation count now far exceeds his last 4 predecessors who collectively were the subject of 11 OIG and OSC investigations, and they have a long list, and they outline all of the charges against you.
Well, let's look who they are. They're Democratic operatives, and they're hacks. They have a post office
But there have been
box.
investigations, that's for real.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm 10 for 10. I've been investigated on my socks. I've been investigated taking jets, which I don't. I've had 10 investigations completed. And you know what they all say? Ryan Zinke follows all the rules, all the regulations, all the procedures. Is that this is politically motivated. In Montana, we call it BS. And organizations like Western Values Project that pretends to be a 501c3 and advocate group, I'd like to see their books. I think everyone would like to see the books where they're funded. They're operatives from the Democratic Party. They're hacks. They've always been. And they need to be investigated.
Okay, listen, we also need to talk to you about Christmas, but we're out of time. So what we'll do is we'll do that, and I'll put it on social media.
Well, I'll say it first. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
If I should be investigated by saying, you know what, Merry Christmas, America.
All right, I'm saying it too, and we'll get into trouble together. I'll put that on social media because I want you to answer that question. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in.
And Merry Christmas.
Good to see you. All right, Speaker Paul Ryan says the election system in California defies all logic. Ballot harvesting and, quote, loosey-goosey methodology. How exactly did the GOP lose so many seats out there? Plus, a look into one Republican's leaked secret plan to fight House Democrats next year. Details coming up. Efforts to counter a new Democrat-controlled House are taking shape tonight. Congressman Jim Jordan elected ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. And earlier today, reporters got a look at Congressman Mark Meadows' confidential plan detailing how to fight the Democrats' expected investigations and subpoenas. Let's turn to Fox News politics editor of the Halftime Report, Chris Steyerwalt. Good to see you, sir.
Howdy, ma'am.
Okay, so Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, key players now in the House. They irritate a lot of the, I think, leadership at times, doing their own thing, but they're going to have some positions as ranking members and others. They have a plan, they say.
Well, first, it tells you a lot about what the priorities for the Freedom Caucus are and what the most prized plum. So once upon a time, it used to be, can I get on a financial committee? Can I get on something that has to do with budgeting, money, armed forces, something like that? So here's the most powerful subunit, arguably, the veto, with the veto power. of the Freedom Caucus. Jordan comes up short in his bid for Speaker. What does he want for the consolation prize? To be number 2 on oversight. To be on, so this tells you where the priorities are, and the priorities rest with protecting the president from Democrats and Robert Mueller, which has been their priority a long time. This tells you where it really matters for them.
Well, and as we had Jason Chaffetz, formerly of the Oversight Committee, on last night, and he said, listen, the Democrats now controlling those committees think that they're going to be able to get all these documents and subpoena everything. Like, the Republicans couldn't get this stuff from the DOJ. So if they can't get it, they claim, good luck to the Democrats, Chaffetz says.
Well, we also remember that Trump could have declassified the stuff.
And
that
he
the
still
Republicans
may.
were, and he still might, but
He's waiting for the right time, he says.
Okay,
Potentially.
we'll see. Well, as the president likes to say, we'll see what happens. I think what you're going to see, Meadows had a plan. He lost. Jordan won. Meadows' plan was, let's be conciliatory and try to sound like the reasonable adults that we're the ones working on. We want to focus on big, important issues. This is a distraction. You're diminishing you're diminishing separation of powers. This is not appropriate. I think we're going to see something different from Jordan. I think we're going to see more Molotov cocktails flying to the other side of the dais.
Okay, now I want to talk about something that happened here partially last night. We had Senator Tim Scott here. He was really struggling with a vote over a nominee to a federal judgeship who had been criticized. Senator Chuck Schumer, says that this is a guy who's been involved in voter suppression. He's been accused of white supremacy. Last night when Senator Scott was here, he said that he'd actually contacted the person who wrote a 1991 DOJ memo. And after talking to that person, he felt better about what he was seeing and finding out about this nominee. He sounded very close to a yes to us last night. And then we find out today he is a no. And he's being praised by the left for that. He's being called courageous.
Well, look, Tim Scott is one of the most interesting people in Congress. He has demonstrated an independent streak. He has demonstrated a thoughtfulness that very few people can match in either party in the United States Senate. He is an exemplary member in a lot of ways. This is interesting. Republicans want to hold up Tim Scott. For a period of time, he was the only African American in the United States Senate, right? And that they could say, look, we have a black member, we're very cool, we're racially cool, we're all of those things. But Tim Scott's not just going to be window dressing for Republicans. When the discussion was around what Republicans in North Carolina have recently done to have voter registration requirements and those things that sort of fall in the normal bandwidth of what Republicans and conservatives think is appropriate. Democrats may call it voter suppression. Republicans call it clean and fair elections. And that's a difference of opinion. And Scott didn't seem troubled by that. But when you get back into the bad old days and you get back into Jesse Helms and you get back into these cards that were sent out to really try to suppress votes, and then you have to ask yourself, if you're a black man in the United States and you say, is there no one who is not touched by this that we could have as a federal judge with a lifetime appointment? Is there no other qualified lawyer in the Tar Heel state that could do this? And I think Tim Scott's answer was, let's not.
Yeah. Well, last night, the left blew up my Twitter feed after his appearance. And today, a lot of them came back to say they now love him. So this is politics in 2018.
Never read the comments, Shannon.
No. The Twitter's is a scary place. It's a scary place. Chris Terwell, thank you.
You bet.
All right. A serial killer now claims he's murdered 90 people. And tonight, Samuel Little is being linked to yet another killing. His disturbing story next. Officials are calling Samuel Little one of the most prolific serial killers in history. A few weeks ago, he confessed to 90 unsolved murders between 1970 and 2005. And now it appears he may be linked to yet another killing. Here's correspondent Casey Stiegel with details. Casey.
Shannon, this chilling new information coming to light after Samuel Little made a deal with investigators, move him out of a California prison to one here in Texas, and he would talk. Well, he appears to be making good on his word, that according to the FBI, who says that the now 78-year-old man has fessed up to killing roughly 90 people. 90 people in 16 states over the span of decades between 1970 and 2005. Authorities across the country started reopening cold or missing persons cases, and so far more than 30 have now been linked to Samuel Little. This map shows the other murders he claims to have carried out. Now law enforcement teams are at work to corroborate those cases. Investigators who've spoken with him say he has a near photographic memory and appears almost proud of his crimes.
He described it when I interviewed him in a way where he was actually excited about describing how he did this murder. And from what I understand, he gets excited every time he describes how he kills a female.
He was already behind bars in California, his murder spree coming to an end after being caught in 2014 and convicted of murders he committed back in the late 80s in California. Samuel Little was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, but these latest revelations have also earned him a dubious distinction, one of, if not now, the top serial killer in American history, now possibly having more victims than Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy. Shannon?
Casey, thank you for that report. Well, tonight's Midnight Hero rises from the ashes of tragedy. You may remember the town of Paradise, California was almost completely wiped out by the devastating Camp Fire. Well, California businessman Bob Wilson surprised the students and staff at Paradise High School with a check for $1,000 each. More than 90% of Paradise students lost their homes to the wildfire that tore through Northern California earlier this month. Bob says he hopes that this will put a smile on their faces and take their minds off what happened. A lot of rebuilding to do there. In the